Good evening to most of our guests here in South Africa, joining us at the Daily Maverick as we host two very special guests who are joining us from Seattle. Good morning to Colin and Bill, the authors of this great new book, Working Backwards, The Secrets Inside Amazon, and how this company just keeps making incredible innovation happen from day one. And we're very lucky and very grateful to have these two people who were generals in the Amazonian army in their time, joining us today to share their insights, their experiences. Colin and Bill, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for having us.
Guys, before we jump to a lot of the insights that the book has, is just so many of them, it's just incredible to be able to spend time and study the material that you guys have put together. Tell us a little bit about the origin of the idea for the book. When did it come about? What were you guys thinking? And why did you decide to pursue this together?
Well, about 3 years ago, I was at a conference with the venture capital firm that I was working with at the time named Maveron. And this was a conference for the CEOs in the portfolio, as well as some important public CEOs as well, who were kind of coming in to talk to them. And one of these CEOs, who should go nameless, I remember the topic of Amazon came up, and he said, Amazon, I don't understand. How does Amazon do it? How have they been able to be so successful in such diverse businesses, from cloud computing to e-commerce to digital media devices, logistics? We're still trying to get our core business right, yet they've been able to have such outstanding success across so many divergent businesses. How do they do it? And I sat in the audience. I didn't raise my hand and answer that question at the time, but I realized that I knew the answer to that question. And I relayed the conversation to Colin actually a few days later. We discussed we discussed this and discussed the fact that, this topic comes up frequently, yet when the media or outsiders seek to answer this question, they really don't know the answer. And so there is no definitive answer to that question out there. We also realized that we were as good as anyone to actually answer this question based on the experiences we had, the positions we had that gave us a front row seat to the transformation process of the company. And most importantly, we realized that the answer to the question could be distilled into a set of principles, as well as 5 scalable, repeatable processes, the combination of which defines what Jeff Bezos has referred to as the Amazon invention machine. And, the cool thing about this machine is that it's really applicable to, it's not just applicable to Amazon. I mean, Amazon has sort of mastered these skills. And so this makes them incredibly effective, but really any company, any leader can learn how to use these processes and to make their company more effective too.
Colin, I'm very grateful that you guys embarked on this journey, but aren't your former colleagues and your former boss a little unhappy about sharing these secrets with the rest of the world? Is someone from Walmart not going to pick this up and turn that around into the next Amazon? Are you guys not worried about that?
Well, the first thing we did when after Bill and I had that chat about writing the book, is we wrote a sample chapter and sent a note to Jeff Bezos and said, hey, Bill and I were thinking of writing a book about Amazon, what makes Amazon tick? What do you think? And he responded and he said, done well, I'd love to see a book like this out there. And I can't think of, two better people to write it than you. And so, that was one great vote of confidence, and that, Jeff was excited to have this message out in the public. But the done well also, when Jeff says done well or done right, he's got incredibly high standards. So it put a fair amount of pressure on us, in a good way, to make sure that we got the story right and encapsulated, these principles and processes in the right way, in an accurate manner. And, our goal was to do that, and with the intent of helping the next generation of business leaders. We were both fortunate to have been at the right place in the right time, learning something very, very special. And people often talk about the products and services that Amazon has built, and the product that people use every day. But we thought that there was another story here that's perhaps more useful for people in organizations, which is how Amazon operates, because you can take some of these lessons in the management science that Amazon has developed and incorporate some of these in your organization, large or small, B2B, B2C. It's really applicable. So we were excited to get this story out here, and we got that early validation from Jeff, so that we moved forward full steam ahead with the book.
Well, and we're very lucky that you guys did it. It really is a useful book. I think, not, as you say, not only for massive corporations, but also small, medium enterprises, not-profits who are just looking for some instruction and assistance in how to approach work and the continuous need for innovation that is demanded of us in this day and age. Gents, I'd like to take a little step back, and maybe you guys can just share some of your history throughout Amazon and the different roles that you guys played. And then maybe also just, talk us through a little bit about, from the outside, if you look at the graph of revenue that Amazon has generated from the day one, it's almost like this perfect exponential graph that just keeps going up. You have your doubts whether some of the people are actually real that are working there. They're not machines that are getting these incredible results year after year. I don't know if you know the latest set of financial results for 2020 for Amazon, $380 odd billion. It's just an incredible number. To put that into context, South Africa's GDP for 2019 was $351 billion. And that wasn't going to grow in 2020 either. So I think it just goes to show that almost from the beginning, there was a method, there was a mindset, these principles were starting to play out. Was that really the case? I mean, or did this sort of iterate and become clearer over time? Bill, did you see it? Was it working from day one that you joined? And maybe you can share some of the roles that you played at Amazon.
Sure.
Go ahead, Colin.
Sorry. So I started in March of '98, and Amazon had just finished its first partial year as a public company and had done $148 million in revenue. There were about between 500 and 600 people at the company total, 100 people in the corporate office, and then 400 to 500 people in the two fulfillment centers. I call them fulfillment centers, but they were really just warehouses with bookshelves because we were only shipping books at that point, and then customer service. So you could also fit the whole software team. I started out in the software group, and you could fit the whole software team in one conference room, a little cozy, but everyone could get together and talk about, what are we going to build next? So, to answer the question, did we envision it would be a $400 billion revenue company in 2020? No, but I will say my first day, I remember my first day going into the office. I did meet Jeff Bezos that day, and he said, our goal is to build Earth's most customer-centric company. And we're going to do that by starting to become the place where people can find and discover anything they might want to buy online. So it was a customer-obsessed vision from the very beginning, and then just focusing on building the e-commerce business was the very first step in that. But and the principles were starting to develop, of customer obsession, of long-term thinking, and invention. But Amazon faced the same problems that every growing company faces. How do you hire people quickly, but you want to hire people who reinforce your culture, not change your culture? How do you stay nimble as you grow? And how do you organize and communicate and launch new products and features? But Amazon came up with a different set of solutions for those by sticking to the core principles of customer obsession, long-term thinking, invention, spirit of invention, and also a pride in operational excellence. And so we tell that journey of how Amazon transitioned from that $150 million company to what it is today.
But it's important to note that the processes and practices we describe in the book, they didn't emerge from Jeff Bezos's head fully formed like Athena. They were iterative processes where we came across problems, we tried applying various solutions to these problems, and through a focus on invention and iteration over time, we developed specific processes that were hardened and proven.
And made a lot of mistakes along the way too. Some of the processes we tried didn't work, so we moved on to do something else. Part of invention hand in hand goes failure. So you have to be willing to try new things, and recognize when they're not working, when to try something else, or when to be stubborn and iterate on if you have the germ of an idea.
And I think that attitude towards failure being temporary, being something that you can learn from, really comes through in the book. And I think you guys talk about it being the other side of the coin of innovation is failure. Bill, you tell a great story about, a great readers, and maybe not for the people who went through the Unbox, the Amazon Unbox product release, in that race against Apple. But did Jeff's attitude or reaction to that episode, did that surprise you? And maybe you can share a little bit about what happened.
Yeah. So to take a step back, when I spent my first 4 years in the company working on the United States physical media business. So this was 1999 through 2003, the end of 2003, and that business was books, CDs, DVDs, VHS tapes. So the media business, and that was Amazon's largest business by far. It actually globally accounted for 77% of all revenue, and it accounted for 100% of all the profit in the company in those years. But by the end of 2003, it was clear that the writing was on the wall that digital media was coming, that physical media would be transformed, and some of the clues to this were that people were using Napster to share millions of songs. There were more than 1 million iPods out in the marketplace, and this was becoming an incredibly popular device. So it didn't take a genius to figure out that digital media was coming. What was hard was to actually understand, well, what are the ways in which this will actually unfold, and where should Amazon begin to build and invest to become successful? One of the notable things that Jeff Bezos decided to do at that point was not to immediately put together a team to create a copy of what Apple had built, create a copy of the iPod, create a copy of iTunes. Instead, my manager, Steve Kessel, he asked him and I to stop working on managing what was the biggest business in the company and start focusing on this business on a full-time basis. In most companies, we would have been asked to simply do that as part of our job. We would have been asked to spin up a team within our organization to focus on this. But Jeff recognized that the opportunity was so large and that the scale of invention and change was so great that he needed experienced leaders who could focus on this on a full-time basis. So one of the first products that I launched, so I ended up focusing and exclusively on the music and video businesses. And so the very first product we launched in digital video was called Amazon Unbox. Probably none of you would have ever heard of it because it was launched in the United States only. And it was also not a great product. It was a product that allowed you to browse and search for movies and TV shows and rent and buy them, but you could only download them to a PC. This was 2006, by the way, so internet speeds were quite slow. There were substantial streaming video was not a thing yet. There were numerous limitations on the digital rights management software that the studios required to protect their content. And so what we could do was quite limited. And more to the point, we made a number of mistakes. We made mistakes in terms of gauging what would be the right product to build. We erred, for example, on the side of providing DVD quality video, which meant that our download times were quite long, which was frustrating to consumers, when in fact Apple went in the other direction, and as well as YouTube, where quality didn't matter so much as speed. And we made mistakes in terms of the quality of the product that we rolled out. We hadn't really done sufficient testing. We were in a mad dash to get to the finish line to make sure that we weren't beaten by Apple. In fact, we were kind of a little bit too focused on our competitors and what the press might say, and not focused enough on our customers. And so the launch didn't go very well. The reviews from the press and from customers were quite negative for the most part. And so yes, I had a hard meeting with Jeff after that launch in his office. I remember it very well. And in most companies, this might have resulted in a demotion or a firing or shuttled off to some corner of the company. But what I had learned by this time was that Jeff recognized that the spirit of invention meant that you were going to screw up from time to time. But what he was focused on is how you learn from those mistakes and how you carry that learning forward. And in fact, clearly document the mistakes that you made, and not only communicate them clearly to your team so that you gain a deep understanding of what you and the organization did wrong, but then in fact you communicate them broadly to the company as a whole, so that the company can learn and develop from those things. So I learned quite a bit from that, and then over the succeeding 5 years, continued to innovate and iterate on what we would be building in digital video. And today, that service is Prime Video. We ended up, building a subscription service. We ended up knitting that service into our own bespoke devices, which were the Fire TV, as well as in music, the Amazon Echo. And we ended up creating our own motion picture studio in Hollywood, Amazon Studios, to feed must-see TV shows and movies into the service that you could only see on Prime Video. So the combination of this work over many years ultimately got us to a successful product.
I love that idea about failure being temporary on the path to success. If you learn your lessons, and that's mistakes are just lessons with emotions attached to them, and such a progressive way of thinking about that, especially when we have quite a conservative culture here in South Africa, and where failure can be almost shamed in a way in a lot of organizations. And I think if you're going to keep working at that front line of innovation, that failure needs to be part of the learning process, and obviously something that the Amazon organization has done incredibly well at. Colin, we've all suffered death by PowerPoint in our lives. What's been quite interesting to see is how you guys shoved death to PowerPoint in your working processes. Why did that come? How did that come about? And how did you guys see the impact of switching to something other than PowerPoint, and the impact it made for you guys?
So two of the years I spent at Amazon, I was Jeff Bezos' technical advisor, and it's commonly called the chief of staff at other companies internally at Amazon. It was called the Jeff Shadow role, but it really meant spending about 10 hours a day with Jeff for 2 years. And they spent those 2 years. I was very lucky to have had that role, but it was between 2003 and 2005, where Amazon really was facing a pivotal, it was a pivotal growth period. We were growing big, and we could either become like most big companies and adopt those processes and kind of slow down and become more conservative, or choose a different path. And in several different areas, we did choose a different path to stay true to the roots of Amazon and move fast. And one of them was with using narratives, which are 6-page written memos over PowerPoint. And with Jeff Bezos, his executive team, his direct reports, where it was about 14 people at the time, called the S team. So we would meet every Tuesday for 4 hours, where we would have 2 or 3 groups come in and present issues across the whole company. Some of them were updates on businesses. Some of them were decision-making forums. Hey, should we move into a new geography or open a new product category? And everything in between. And these meetings work just like any other company at that time. The teams would come in and present a set of slides. Sometimes they would make it through the slides, most often not, because you had 14 very critical thinkers peppering the presenters with questions before they could get to the next slide. And we realized we were not making the high quality decisions, and the businesses were only getting bigger and more complicated, and the stakes were getting higher and higher. And Jeff he's famous for his long-term thinking. So if you take a look at that and say, where is this thing going to go if we double and triple? It's just going to get worse. And we realized it wasn't the teams. We tinkered around with different PowerPoint formats that the teams had to come in and use, and that wasn't working. And we were influenced by a professor at Yale University, Edward Tufte, who was a big proponent of using narratives instead of PowerPoint. And it was one week in June of 2004 where Jeff just made the decision, we're going to go try something new. And from now on, every team that comes and presents to the Amazon management team is going to come in with written narratives versus slides. So it was a rip the Band-Aid overnight move, and it was very unpopular at the time. I felt good about it, but I think Jeff and I were probably the only two people in the company who thought this was a good move, and I don't think I'm exaggerating too much about that. I
can validate that.
Colin, I'm presenting next week. What is a narrative, and what is it supposed to look like? And there are a couple noteworthy things. One, it was an experiment, and if it didn't work, we could have always gone back a couple weeks or a couple months later to using slides. So we knew what we were doing wasn't working, so we had to try something. It was a reversible decision. And, it also wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. We had been studying for the past couple months, Jeff and I, really bouncing ideas off of one another on how to improve these meetings, because they were very important. They're very expensive meetings. It was the top leaders at the company. And the first couple weeks, the first narratives were kind of laughably primitive and poor. If you were to look at them today and compare them to an Amazon typical narrative that's written today, you'd kind of laugh at the difference. But Jeff, a couple of years later, called that move one of the best decisions Amazon has ever made. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. One is that writing a narrative, it is harder to do that than put together some slides, but it really forces the writing team, because it's often more than a single author for this 6-page memo, to have clarity of thought. And you have to write and rewrite it. It takes time before they present to the audience. So it's incumbent on them to really think through their issues and have a great story arc and a well thought out argument before it gets to the decision making forum. Two is just, if you look at the pixel density of a narrative versus slides, it's about 7 to 9 times the pixel density. People read faster than other people talk, so you can get through more material. And a narrative is just a better way to handle these multi-causal complex arguments than a hierarchical bullet point and sub-bullet point slide, one after another. So all in, you get about 10 times as much information from the writers, the presenters, over to the audience who's going to help make that decision. So you get about 10 times or more the information with the same unit of time. An hour spent listening to slides and discussing is the same as an hour reading a narrative and commenting on it. So the way that Amazon narrative meetings work is the document is circulated either virtually or physically if everyone's in the same room, and for the first 20 minutes, the meeting is silent. So it's kind of a bizarre experience for the first time you go to an Amazon narrative meeting, because everyone is just so focused on reading the well thought out story arc and arguments and questions that the presenters are putting forth. And then people are commenting either in the doc, online, or writing questions. And then you have 40 minutes of really detailed discussion, because if you look at it through a different lens on what's happening in those 20 minutes, there's just a massive amount of information that's being transferred from the presenting group to the audience. And so that next 40 minutes is high quality discussion. And what happens there is it just, you make better decisions, or your chances of making higher quality decisions are much greater using the right tool. So, narratives, it's worked out very well for Amazon. And that's one of those things that would be impossible to take the narrative process out of Amazon. The last thing I'll mention is that a great signal that this process was working is that it was more a carrot versus a stick approach. Once people saw these narratives and being used at those S-team meetings, people started using them in their own groups. So it wasn't something that had to be, forced on all of the other groups. People just started adopting narratives because they knew it was a better way to help their teams make better decisions.
And I guess engineers must have just loved writing documents in the beginning. I can imagine that must have been a bit of change management that needed to happen internally. But sticking with the theme of writing and also working backwards, I think the PR FAQ method of really encompasses and embodies what you got, what the organization is trying to achieve by working backwards. Bill, what were some examples of firstly, what is the PR FAQ system, and what were some examples that you thought worked really well in those cases where you used them?
So the PR FAQ stands for press release and frequently asked questions, and this is referred to as the working backwards process, and it's called that because normally in any product development process, the last thing you would do is to write a press release. After you've built it, engineered it, you pass this over to the marketing and PR team, and then they've got to figure out how to sell it. Well, we went through an iterative process here too. So as we were trying to, beginning in 2004, we had, Jeff and the company had two areas of focus for innovation. One was digital media, and the other was a new technology called web services. And there were two different teams. I was on the digital media team, and then Andy Jassy, who will become the second CEO of Amazon, was heading up this new web services team. And we were spending a lot of time with Jeff and iterating on how do we have a productive method for conceptualizing and debating and discussing different product ideas that we could go develop. And like all these other processes, it was a journey. So we started off using sort of tried and true techniques that we had been taught in business school, like coming in with spreadsheets that projected the size of these businesses, projected our market share, discussed the financials, discussed the kinds of deals we would make with content providers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure at some point we may have even conducted a SWOT analysis where you looked at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But we bring these dry sort of numbers and spreadsheets and projections into Jeff, and what he would react to, he sort of would look up from these documents and just sort of squint at us and say, "Where are the mock-ups?" And what he meant by that is, this is somewhat useful information, but would be much more useful is to understand what's the customer experience you intend to build. So we actually did follow up with meetings where we brought in mock-ups, designs of what the website experience would be. But developing a high quality mock-up is actually a very expensive process. It requires usually more than one skilled designer. It requires you to actually think through a lot of details of what the product will be. And that was quite heavyweight. So we tried that for a while, but that didn't get us much further because we spent so much time worrying about the mock-up that we weren't spending time worrying about what was the actual customer experience going to be. So finally, Jeff proposed a different way, which was to say, why doesn't everyone in this meeting simply write up a document describing what they think we should go build in digital media? And we did that. We went away, came back a week later with, 6 or 7 or 8 documents that people had drafted. And we read through these and we realized that we were getting somewhere now because this was a much lighter weight process. Any one individual could on their own write up a document to describe an end-to-end customer experience. They didn't require a designer or special skills. And secondly, you could very efficiently in a few hours plow through many, many different ideas and have high quality discussions about them. And then he took it one step further and said, I know, instead of these sort of he framed and created a way to take those documents and formalize them as this PR FAQ. He said, let's write the press release. And let's write that first, because by starting at the end of the process, that's when you're actually very focused on what are the customer, about the customer, and what about this product is really going to appeal to them. And so that when they read this press release or read about it in the press, they will actually want to get out of their chair and go buy it. And so when you do that, when you write the press release, you are hyper focused on what problem you're trying to solve for the customer and how this product solution really solves it in a meaningful way. And then the second part of that is the frequently asked questions, and those then address the various challenges and constraints. So when you're writing that press release, you want to not constrain yourself by your current capabilities. You want to just focus on what would make a great customer experience. And in digital media, that meant focusing on building a specific device. The first device was the Amazon Kindle. But you have to remember, back in 2004, 2005, we were an e-commerce only company. We'd never built any devices. We'd never built any applications for, well, apps for mobile devices didn't exist in those days, PCs. So it was quite a leap when through this process, we really realized that to make the ebook experience come to life for customers based on where it was at that time, there had to be a purpose-built device that included capabilities like a screen that you could read outside, that would be always connected to the internet, which was not a thing back in 2004. They would have a vast selection of books, not the narrow selection that publishers were offering in those days. That the prices had to be compelling and competitive, $10 or $15, not the $30 that publishers were charging for ebooks in those days. On and on and on. We basically came up with this vision of what would be the device and the ebook service that would matter. And then in the FAQ, we methodically worked through, okay, well, what will be all the technical problems and business problems we're going to have to solve to actually enable this fantastic experience we've just described, and what kind of a team are we going to need to hire? So we didn't constrain ourselves, which led us to do things that most companies wouldn't do, like creating our own group to develop hardware, and solving challenging technical problems like how would we enable the device to be able to use a cellular connection with carriers without having the user to have a subscription with the carrier, and to make it affordable for us. And so it was a simultaneous process of inventing a process and inventing a product. And Kindle, so Kindle and this PRFAQ process were hand in hand. And then by the same token, by the way, the same journey was going on with Amazon Web Services.
The one thing I'll add is that you can, with these press releases, it's a very quick way to iterate through a number of very different ideas. So it actually, even though it feels like you're slowing down in the beginning, it saves a bunch of time. You can have 2 or 3 competing ideas and read a press release. And the best ideas pop out pretty quickly to say, oh, here we have something with this idea. We may need to refine it a bit, or this isn't quite what we want to build. It's off path, or it doesn't solve a real customer problem or need. So it's a good way to efficiently iterate through some ideas. And it's part of the answer of how does Amazon move so fast, and how do they really launch these features that, oh yeah, I realize I didn't realize I needed it, but now that it's out there, I can't imagine living without it. And it is because of this iterative PRFAQ process is one of the reasons why Amazon is able to do that consistently.
Gents, I'm going to take some questions from our audience who've been posting in the chat. And Chris Short asks, it seems that the freedom of not being expected to make profits in regular timeframes, was this the case? I mean, there's this it's a misconception, but there was this perception from outside that there wasn't the pressure to make those profits on a quarterly basis. Is that true? Is that how you guys were working inside? What was there? Don't worry about profits. We've got enough here to cover us until things come around, until profitability, we get there.
Amazon did have very real resource constraints in terms of how many people we could hire, how quickly we could hire, the capital that we had, and we really wanted to conserve those resources. But if you look at the very first shareholder letter, the 1997 shareholder letter, Jeff said it's all about the long term. And if your goal is to build a long-term durable company, and you have the unshakable conviction that the long-term interests of customers are completely aligned with the long-term interests of shareholders, it does free you up from focusing on what happens the next quarter. And make no mistake about it, Amazon is focused on generating free cash flow and building a large company, and is evidenced by the results. But if you do focus on a lot of short-term goals, what a lot of companies do is they veer off path. And in order to hit a short-term goal, they work on something that is temporary, either pulls demand from a future period into the current period. It doesn't create anything new. It just shifts things around and optimizes for optics. But if you're long-term focused, you're not veering off path. And I think one of the misconceptions is that long-term thinking takes you longer to get to your goal. And often it does. And often you get to your goal quicker by using long-term thinking. Two great data points are the fastest company to grow from 0 to $100 billion in revenue was Amazon. Someone grew faster from 0 to $10 billion in Amazon, and that was AWS, a unit within Amazon. If you took it as a standalone company, and AWS did not have any tailwinds from the rest of Amazon.com. It was a very different business, and those were both used looking at long-term thinking and grew very fast.
But it wasn't always the case that everything was a home run from day one. I mean, you guys did have some incredible home runs, but you guys talk about how the principle of frugality, or one of the leadership principles of frugality, helped you guys stick with a couple of projects that didn't really jump out the gates. Which were some of those that that were fortunate enough to be given that support over a period of time?
Well, I managed two of them, and one was what's today known as Amazon Music, and what's today known as Prime Video. So most people think of the Amazon today and think, oh, they've got more than 1 million employees. So when Amazon does something, they would just throw unlimited bodies at the problem. And while it's certainly true that back in 2004, Amazon was bigger than most companies. We had about $6 billion in sales there, but we were just barely making any profit. And so teams were quite lean. So for example, for the Amazon Music store, the first version of which was called Amazon MP3, I launched and ran that business initially with a team of 20 people. And the same was true of the video store. And over the succeeding years, we started to grow our revenue, but we managed very tight cost controls. I never spent a dime on broad scale marketing. So a lot of companies, when they're launching a new service, they'll go create a big splashy marketing campaign. And as soon as you spent $10 million of marketing over 6 months, then that money is gone and you can't get it back. Well, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't, because we would instead take that $10 million, if I even had that much money, and focusing on how do I have more engineers to build better features for the customer to be able to afford to continue to invent. And one of those businesses actually was very close to, or eked out, a small profit within a few years, and the other one was losing money. But the reason why these businesses weren't canceled were because they were managed in such a frugal way, had such small teams, did not spend a lot of money on marketing, that it wasn't really costing the company that much money. A, and B, we knew that there was a big future in these businesses, and that if we were stubborn on the long-term vision that customers are going to want to, stream, download, watch movies and TV shows, and listen to music on a wide variety of devices, which didn't exist at that time, but manage our business very carefully and methodically to be able to afford to get to that place, that we could. And it wasn't until we actually came up with the right formula, beginning in about 2010, a full 6 years after I started working on the business, that we actually started to invest heavily. And then over a very short period of time, 3 years, my total team of music and video grew from about 150 to 1,500 people.
Robin Irwin asked, can you use this model for a charity organization? And, what would your advice be to a charity organization and maybe a smaller business looking to implement some of these tactics and principles?
Yeah, you can use a lot of these processes. I was on the board of a charity in New York, actually, and was introducing some of these principles about using narratives, how you hire people. Charities, you have to hire people, especially with small organizations. You want to make sure that the people you bring on board are really going to advance the cause. So these processes are fairly lightweight, and they're easy to understand. They may take a little while to practice and become experts in these processes. But in particular, the Amazon bar raiser process, using narratives versus slides is something that any organization can do, and they'll start making higher quality decisions more often than not with that. The PRFAQ approach, the working backwards approach, is another lightweight approach that works for small organizations. So, Amazon uses these tools, by the way, not just for the external products and features, but internal groups use them too within Amazon. And both Bill and I have implemented these at other organizations, large and small.
When you guys were there, did you feel there was this drive to continuously innovate and meet growth targets, or was the overriding sense that it's really all about creating customer satisfaction, satisfying the needs of the customer? We've seen the incredible chart of revenue growth. Was that hanging over your heads, or was it a different sense that, maybe wasn't fear-driven, but driven by a greater sense of purpose and a more positive influence?
Well, there was purpose of both innovation and customer obsession, and the two, in this case, sort of went hand in hand, which was the concept of how do we constantly invent on behalf of customers, although in many cases, some of the invention was process-oriented innovation. So there's a huge, what outsiders see when they look at Amazon is they see the tip of an iceberg. And what they don't see is the much larger part of the iceberg, which is below the water. And below the water, what's happening is a relentless focus on how to operate a business that delivers, that is actually blindingly complex. So the company offers tens of millions of different items. You have individual orders coming in from customers. How does the company make intelligent decisions about which fulfillment centers to route those orders, which trucks to put them on to deliver them to customers or airplanes on time, and how to do this all in a highly profitable way that meets customers' needs. So there were so to do this, one of the things that I found remarkable was that I discovered relatively quickly within my job that, based on feedback from my manager, that it was my responsibility to always have at least one, if not more than one thing in my operating plan, my annual operating plan, that required there was some form of innovation, whether it was customer innovation, process innovation, that actually was risky. It was unclear whether it would work. But if it did work, it would really advance the business, advance the experience for customers in a very meaningful way. And that it would be okay if it failed, so long as it was really well thought out and so long as the team executed effectively against that initiative. So most companies aren't like that. I mean, most companies, once you have an existing business, they tend to be very cautious and conservative about protecting it, and they tend to be reticent to take meaningful risks that will put what they have in any jeopardy. And by relentlessly focusing on, the good news is by focusing on customers, you're getting a constant stream of feedback about ways in which your service could be better. So once you figured out how to deliver packages to customers within 3 days, they'll say, that's nice, but how about 2? Once you do 2, they'll say, that's nice, but how about 1? Once you've done 1, they'll say, that's nice, but how about in 15 minutes? And oh, by the way, in an online business, they don't use the friendliest language in the world to tell you all the ways in which that you've screwed up and could be better. So by tuning into all that customer feedback, it actually leaves you in a state just like them, where you are perpetually unsatisfied and in a perpetual state of trying to live up to their needs and standards.
The only thing I'll add is we did have revenue targets to hit, but what Amazon learned fairly early on is that focusing on those output metrics can drive you crazy, and it can also lead you to do take the wrong actions. And so what Amazon figured out is focus on the controllable input metrics, the things that if you do those things right, you will more often than not achieve your output metrics, your revenue goals, gross profit goals, customer growth. And those controllable input metrics, as Bill mentioned, they're largely customer facing metrics. How fast can you get products to customers? Can you lower the cost structure so you can afford to lower prices? Lowering prices is easy. Affording to lowering prices is hard. How can you make it the most, add more products to the catalog? So if you took a look at the planning process, yes, we'd have some high level yearly goals that had some output metrics, but the vast portion of the year in the review process, we're focusing on the input metrics and doing those right. And largely it comes down to customer obsession and innovation how do you double the size of the catalog? How do you cut down the click to deliver time by 3 hours in the upcoming quarter? You have to work at that really hard and innovate on that. You do those things right, the output metrics will come.
Kasim asked this question, which is near and dear to my heart, because I learned of an innovation term called ambidextrous organizational design last year, and it's something that's stuck with me. And I don't know if you guys were consciously doing this at the time, but in Kasim's question is, how is Amazon able to manage to run different types of organizations under one roof? You've got an established e-commerce business that is generating huge amounts of revenue. There's the new digital media business, for example, that is potentially going to cannibalize that. And I think I know the answer to this, but how was Amazon able to do that? And did later on, did geography play a role in being able to design the organization to do that? Well,
so one thing is you'll take a look at Amazon's diverse set of businesses. The one thing that they do have in common is this invention machine on how the ideas were developed and how the business were operated. So that is, I think, one thing to keep in mind. But Amazon has a concept and a process. It's called the single-threaded leader and separable teams. And when you have a new idea, you want to make sure that you have someone who's working on that, who's starting a team, who one is not bogged down by their day job doing something else. So there's a quote by the SVP, Senior Vice President of Devices, Dave Limp, who says the best way to fail at inventing something is to make it someone's part-time job. So if it's important enough worth doing or an experiment worth trying, you need to make sure that there's someone whose sole focus is on making that effort a success. It may not be successful every time, but you need to increase your chances by making sure you resource it appropriately. And that doesn't mean over-resource it like Bill was talking about earlier, throwing millions of marketing dollars or getting a large organization. These AWS started out with a very small team, and it did not get bigger until the customers validated the use of the service. But if you have those single separable teams, and it requires both an organizational mindset in terms of autonomous decision making, but you also have to have your technical architecture and remove the dependencies between these teams, where you're not if you find yourself that you're coordinating and having to talk to other teams in order to get your work done, you need to figure out how to break those dependencies. Sometimes it's a technology issue, sometimes it's an organizational issue, but breaking those apart. And the last thing is, how is Amazon able to do it is because Amazon really, a lot of these are driven from customer feedback. It's not driven by what's going on, what competitors are doing, or how can we nudge into an adjacent market. As Bill mentioned earlier, customers will tell you what's working well, what's not, what they need, and then you need to also invent on their behalf. But I would say the separable single-threaded team leader concept is one reason why Amazon is able to operate these independently. That combined with the invention machine is what all these things have in common, all these businesses have in common.
To address your geographical question, so an example of this is that for the businesses that I ran, Amazon Music and Prime Video, first of all, I was not reliant on central functional organizations. So, for example, I didn't go work when I built the business. I didn't go work with the CTO of Amazon to say, "Can you give me some engineers to work on this?" I built my own engineering organization. I wasn't reliant on the country manager when I wanted to launch in the UK. I wasn't reliant on the e-commerce country manager in the UK. I hired and built my own organization to focus exclusively on, actually two different organizations, one to focus exclusively on music and one to focus exclusively on video in the UK. And that was the same recipe for every country and region around the world. So the point is that you basically are building a company within inside a company so that you don't have these internal dependencies and coordination, which will really slow you down and prevent you from innovating and meeting the specific goals for your business, for your customers.
Gents, you guys have been amazing, and you've done a lot of media interviews, and you've had probably had to repeat a lot of questions multiple times over. Is there a question someone hasn't yet asked you that you wish they had about this book or about working at, with regards to innovation, working at Amazon or the process itself?
I think the question that maybe it's been asked once or twice is, in our title, it says Inside Stories and Secrets from Inside Amazon. Well, what's the secret, or what are the secrets? And if I had to distill it to one secret, I would tell you that the secret is that Amazon is not a cult of personality. It's not just about the personality of Jeff Bezos, nor is it a company that should be over the course of history will only be known for, boy, they built a lot of innovative products, and boy, they became a really large company. I think the secret that we're trying to reveal to people is that the company has been as innovative and impactful in terms of the management science that it's developed as anything else. And much in the way that when I was, to date myself, in university and in getting my MBA in the 80s and 90s, I would study Japanese companies to understand, or General Electric to understand their management techniques. We wrote this book because we fully believe that over the, now and in the future, people should and will study Amazon to understand the specific management science and techniques that they've built. Because just as by learning from how Toyota advanced quality and the specific programs they developed to do so, I think companies can learn about how to truly become an innovative, customer-obsessed company by studying and replicating the processes and practices that Amazon has developed.
Gents, I think we're almost out of time. I want to thank you two for making this time to join us and to come and talk about a book that I really wish you guys had written 10 years ago. Would have been really useful for us, so we would have been able to use it here at Daily Maverick and so many other places. So thank you very much for doing that, and to thank our guests, our attendees who sat with us all the way through this. Hopefully they learned a great deal. The books are available for pre-order in South Africa. They're not yet in the country, but you will be able to order them through us. And also to thank our sponsors, APSA, who have been working with us as we've hosted e-commerce week this week at Daily Maverick. And just once again, thank Colin and Bill for such a great book. It's going to do amazing things for so many people who take this on board, who can implement those practices from the smallest organization through to the biggest ones. Innovation is a demand of every organization now. It really, we're in that space where you innovate or die. You have no choice. And this really gives us that opportunity to find out how can we be inspired by the principles that have, probably made the most innovative company get it to where it is today. So thanks very much. Thanks for joining us, and hope you have a lovely evening. And thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.